Good morning, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about the Korean War as a part of the Cold War. So still focus on that thing. With different decisions and action took by different blocs, you need to be able to identify if these actions were defensive or offensive. Okay, and to also have deeper understanding on the containment policy. So the Korean War. At that time, before the end of Second World War, actually the whole Korea was occupied by Japan until 1945. At the end of the Second World War, the northern part of Korea was liberated by the Soviet troops because you can see this like it's closer to China and also it's closer to the Soviet Union, while the southern part was liberated by the US. So the North remained communist controlled with a communist leader who had been trained in the USSR and was a Soviet-style one-party system. So in the northern part, we have these leaders, right? Firstly, we have Kim Il-sung, and then we have Kim Jong-il. So now we have Kim Jong-un, right? They belong to the same family, right? So on the other side, for the South, was an anti-communist. It was not very democratic, like it's not a total democratic country, but the fact that it was anti-communist was enough to win the support of the USA. For the other part, it was led by him, Lee Shin-wen, or Shin-wen Ri. Why he was so special to gain the support from the US, actually you can see some hints from his experience. Firstly, he obtained a bachelor degree, a Bachelor of Arts from George Washington University in 1907. It means actually he was trained in US compared to while these leaders were trained in the Soviet Union. And also, he had a Master of Arts from the Harvard University, and he even obtained a PhD from the Princeton University. And he deeply understands the democracy, like in US, and what it's like, right? And also in his PhD years, he's like studies on neutrality as influenced by the United States. That means like for so many years of his studies in US, he's studying about the United States like foreign policies, right? So this is also the like very important reason why he can be the leader of the southern part of Korea, while he's so easy to gain the support when he understands US so much compared to others. But you have to see right after the Second World War, actually the Communist Party of Soviet Union has took a very rapid reaction. You can see actually most of the land in Korea actually controlled by Koreans and Chinese. They took a very rapid actions with the support of USSR, while the land controlled by Americans and UN force only contain a little amount of space. Right? So what do you think the actions took by Truman would be better at this time? He's talking about containment. He's not really encouraging like conflicts or the war between different blocs, right? But at this time, they can't be too weak while they were containing or surrounding or besieged by the other side, right? This is the reason why President Truman immediately sent advisors, supplies, and warships to the water around Korea. And also at the same time, he put enormous pressure on the US Secretary Council to condemn the actions of the North Koreans and to call on them to withdraw troops. They shouldn't intervene so much in Korea, shouldn't like to this extent, right? But you still need to know, while the US, they were putting pressure on UN, it can be very serious because one of the critiques on UN is that UN always like serve for these like powerful countries. But you can't deny that actually the US was the single biggest contributor at that time to the UN budget. So they're actually financing UN. They're the financial pillar for the UN, right? And was therefore in a powerful position to influence the UN decision. Actually, you can see this in different ways. While the Communist Party, their influence can be like so large in this country, maybe this is the phase for that country. Right? Just next to them, we have a very huge country called China, which was already built the People's Republic of China, right? Under the rule of Communist Party. For UN, they should keep their neutrality to this kind of trend in an independent country, instead serving for the capitalist bloc. But under the pressure of US, of course, UN have to take actions, right? The nature of the war had now changed. It was clear that the US was striving for a bigger price to remove communism from Korea entirely. So you can see only a month later, with the support of US, things has turned around, right? It's like the influence of the Koreans, Americans, and US forces have become like really huge just in 1 month, right? This is time when Mao Zedong said, no, you are not. You are not really remove communism from Korea. But you have to know at that time, actually, from the General MacArthur, actually a very famous general during the Cold War period, his speech in October 1950. So let's see what he said. Had the Chinese intervened in the first or second months, it would have been decisive. But we are no longer fearful of their intervention because now we have bases for our air force in Korea. That means we have such a powerful military force, and we even have air bases in Korea. There's like no chance for the other side to win over us, right? They would be the great slaughter, like they will only die. There's no other results, right? If they want to spread their influence to our side, we can just feel free to send the air force, right? But Mao Zedong's feedback is just a kind reminder, you underestimate our people's volunteers. So actually at that time, the same month in October 1950, 200,000 Chinese troops, which names People's Volunteers, joined the North Koreans, and they were fearless. The soldiers, they were strong, committed to the communism, and they have that kind of ideologies, indoctrination. They always want to sacrifice their life for the revolution, for the party, for the goods of the nation, of the ideology, right? So these people, they are willing to sacrifice and fight for the party and the ideologies. But more importantly, it's not only about when the soldiers, they are so committed to the communism. It's also the time when Soviet Union, after so many years, it's already in 1950, right? They already have their own nuclear bomb, remember? And also they had modern tanks and planes supplied by the Soviet Union. This is also the reason why in January, that means like 3 months later, in January 1950, you can see the UN troops were pushed back into the South Korea. But you may have one question, right? The US, their general, had already mentioned that they have air bases in Korea. So you can just feel free to send the air force, and they can just like eliminate and suppress the troops, the communist troops, like in a very short time, I believe. So why they didn't directly send the troops or directly send the air force to that part of Korea to just fix the thing, right? So this is about the very important feature of the Cold War. While people, they don't, especially for US, when they held the containment policy, they don't want to show others that they are too aggressive, right? So they have to sensitive to their reactions at that time. So that's the reason why the war came to a stalemate, where both sides were unable to defeat each other and gradually visited the front at the 38th parallel. This is the 38th parallel. So peace talks between North and South began in June. That means like 5 months after the counterattack from the Communist Party. But bitter fighting continued until, that means it's like not a great chance for them to talk for a peace settlement. But something happened to stop them. Firstly, Truman replaced by Eisenhower. We're going to talk about Eisenhower later. More importantly, Stalin died while he was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev. While Khrushchev is having a totally different attitude towards the capitalist states and also towards their ultimate goal and towards their relationship. That is the reason why Chinese and North Koreans, they have less confidence, and armistice was finally signed in July 1953. That means you can see they keep fighting each other in a bitter conflicts for another 2 years, right? So let's talk about this, right? Was Korean War a success of containment policy? This is the border between the North and South Korea from 1945 from the start of the Korean War to the end of the Korean War. You can see the most important feature is they keep a stalemate in the 38th parallel. Actually, this parallel was like kept until now, still didn't fix, right? So do you think containment really worked here while it contained the spread of communism? I think if we compare this map and this map, then it's a yes, right? In one sense, the Korean War was a success for the USA. The cost and the casualties were high, but it showed that the USA had the will and the means to contain the communism. That means they were able to, they were capable to contain the communism, right? But if you compare this, the second map, to the last map, you may see why, even though they have such a powerful air base, they didn't really send those troops to eliminate their enemies. So it also showed the limits of the policy. The USA, they had to accept that North Korea remained communist. They're containing the communists. They're not fighting the communists, right? So it also highlighted the tensions among the American leaders. Actually, a lot of people that critique on Truman about his policy. If you have the power to eliminate the communism in Korea, why didn't you just do what you can, right? So they thought that Truman had shown weakness in not going for outright victory. So you can regard this as a part of like defensive policy, right? They're just protecting people who under the suppression and the expansion of communism, right? They were not really fighting them because they're containing them instead of fighting them. They have no aggressions over them, right? This is the reason why somehow it will show that the US can be a little weak on this kind of things. So you can see under containment policy, there was some like regional war, but you can see that USSR and US, they don't want to fight with each other directly in the battlefield. For example, the USSR, other than sending troops, they were sending like Chinese troops, and also they were sending the military aid instead of sending themselves to the Korea, right? And also for US, even though the UN troops was led by a US general, still that sent UN troops. So even though there are troops from US in Korea, but those names for those troops were under UN instead of US. So this is like a very important feature to show how Cold War like was cold, right? So other than those means, how people they like contained each other, right? Let's make a little conclusion. Firstly, the alliance, there's economically and military support, economic and military aid, right? NATO, Warsaw Pact, right? And also armament raise while they spend vast amount of money on new weapons. But you have to see most of the times they don't really use those weapons. They just put it there to show how strong they were, right? And they spied on one another to steal technological secrets and confidential documents. For example, he is a spy from USSR. He worked in New York until he was arrested in 1957. So they just arrest spies from each other's sides like frequently during the Cold War period. And also the USA, they favor in high-tech spying. Instead of sending like spies as like human spies, they always use these high techs to spy on the other side. For example, this U-2 plane. Why this U-2 plane can be so like significant in spying is because it will fly so high, it can't be shot down easily from the land. It also can take incredibly detailed photos of the ground. How detailed? It could read a newspaper from 40 miles up in the sky. So this is kind of a high-tech spying. It has led to the U-2 incident in 1960. In May 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia. While Eisenhower, the president of US at that time, said, "Don't panic. There were no intelligence gathering activities, only a weather research." So they're doing weather research instead of spying on their confidential information. Who can believe that? I don't think anyone can really trust this kind of claim, this kind of like unreliable claim, right? It's too obvious. So, however, the USSR revealed that the YouTube wreckage had been found and the pilot had been captured alive. That is the reason why finally the president was forced to admit that it was a spy plane. This was called the U-2 incident. You can also use this as a part of, like, you can see this, you think this is defensive or offensive. Actually, you can say this is like defensive, but while this only for information, they're not for expansion or aggression, right? But also you can say this is like offensive because they violate the rules while they're sending planes to get the information that they shouldn't get. They should, if they really want those messages, they should do it in a like very like formal way instead of secretly, right? So you can see all the times why defensive and offensive thing can be like very controversial is that you can get both part of the answer. So to decide one thing, if it's defensive or offensive, it really depends on your judgment. You can see the propaganda at the time, like the Eisenhower trying to paint the U-2 plane like as a peace dog while it was for confidential information, right? And also the US, this is also from the USSR. You can see US, they were using their atomic bombs and weapons throughout the globe, right? Like the USSR tried to bring the image that the US, they were holding an expansionist policy and have aggressions towards the globe at that time. They tried to send the message to others that their actions were really offensive, right? So you can see actually Cold War can be separated into very different stages, right? We already talked about the cooperation in the Second World War, and actually I think we already finished talking about the first Cold War, right? From 1946 to 1943, we talk about Chinese Civil War, the Korean War, and also all the containment policy. So there this agreement between US and the USSR over Germany and Europe, Eastern Europe, and the development nuclear arms race lead to growing tension. So we also talk about the Berlin blockade, right? So after Khrushchev came into power in USSR, actually the USSR, their policy has slightly changed. So from next class, we're going to start to talk about the fluctuating relations. That means it can be a very subtle day. While actually Khrushchev paid a visit to US, but on the other side, it has led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost led to a nuclear hot war of the world. So the world almost destroyed in 1962. See you in the next video.